Hey everyone, Charles Walhingford back again with another cigar video. This is more cigar talk, and I know there's other people who've done videos on this, and I just want to put my 2 cents in and explain to you how I feel about this subject. And the number one thing is, uh, are Cubans better than non-Cubans? But I'm gonna outline some pros to Cubans, and then I'm gonna outline some cons to Cubans, and then I'll talk about non-Cubans in this same video, pros and cons, and I'll explain why I feel that Cubans are not the best. All right, jumping right into it, I'm gonna tell you this. Let me bring this a little bit closer, so there's no confusion. Cubans are the standard. Um, Much like Swiss watchmaking, it's the same kind of scenario where that's where it was perfected. Not necessarily started, but perfected. Watchmaking was perfected in Switzerland, especially with Rolex, and cigar rolling was perfected in Cuba, in particular with brands like Cohiba. So I will tell you this: that is, if you could have your first cigar being a Cuban, that wouldn't be a bad way to go. Actually, honestly, that wouldn't be a bad way to go, and especially if it's affordable, depending on where you're from and things like that, it may not be affordable and be somewhat of a waste of time and money if you got yourself a nice Cuban cigar and didn't like cigar smoking at all. But again, Cubans are the standard, and that's where a lot of most cigar companies have set themselves. Now, one thing about Cubans is nothing tastes like them. They have a very, very distinctive flavor and profile I haven't had with no other cigar. Not all of them taste like this. A lot of them do. Um, with Cohiba, with Monte Cristo, with Romeo y Julieta, Bolivar, they have this smooth creaminess that I haven't tasted hardly anywhere. Not hardly anywhere. Anywhere. I've had that came close. I've had some that come close. Um, Perfect example is the Davidoff Nicaragua. The Davidoff Nicaragua tastes very creamy and smooth, much like that Cuban Bolivar. But other than that, no one comes really close, and it's very distinctive. Does that make it a better flavor? That does it make it better? Not necessarily, but that's something special, absolutely special about Cuban cigars. Another thing about Cuban cigars, it's one of my last ones. A lot of times they're often imitated. Take for example, everybody comes out with their own Cuban-esque cigar, like the Black Market by Alec Bradley, Camacho pre-embargo. Everybody has something, or most of the brands, the big brands, have something that says this is what Cuban cigars would taste like now if we made them, or this is what they used to taste like, but we're just making a non-Cuban version of it, so on and so forth. It goes back to what I said in the first one. The first pro was Cuban cigars are the standard. Everybody feels compelled to say these cigars are like Cubans, or this is what a Cuban cigar should taste like, and things like that. So they're often imitated, rarely ever duplicated. All right, let's go over to the cons. Now, this con is almost the same thing as the previous pro. With they're also often imitated to the point of counterfeiting. They are counterfeited all the time, and That's a truly unfortunate thing, but that's what happens when you become uber popular. If you're super popular and everybody wants to be you, or everybody wants a piece of you, or wants to sell your product, and they can't, they find ways to sell your product. And then what do you have? Especially because of the embargo, you have counterfeits because people who've never had them don't know what they're looking at, and they fall for it, and they get duped into believing that they have something real. Again, the same thing with Swiss watchmaking and Rolex, Cuban cigars, and Cohiba cigars. I mean, Cuban Rolex watches and Cohiba cigars, they're often Im- uh, imitated to the point where they are counterfeited. And you have to be on your toes, or you have to make sure you do your research and know what you're looking at. Other brands, you don't have to worry about that. I've never came across a fake Davidoff or fake Arturo Fuente Opus X. Let's move on. Another con with Cuban cigars, they're highly, highly overrated. Overrated. Again, I know I fall upon this and I say, hey, if you haven't had a Cuban cigar yet, you're not truly a good cigar expert. You're not a cigar aficionado. I truly believe that. But part of the reason why I believe that is to know that they're not that good. They're good, don't get me wrong. Sometimes they're very good, but they're not that good to the point where if you haven't had a Cuban cigar, you don't know what anything good tastes like. That's not true at all. And what goes into that con is, let me bring it back a little bit before I go into the next con. With the highly overrated, they're a lot of times they're overpriced, absolutely overpriced because of the embargo for the United States, and because of the it's almost hip or trendy or cool to have a Cuban cigar in your hand. All right, now Cuban cigar snobbery. That's my next con. A lot of times, people who can get a hold of Cuban cigars with no problem truly believe they have the best cigars in the world all the time, no matter which Cuban cigar they're smoking. That is so far from the truth. It's so far from the truth for so many reasons, because you really can't quantify it. Because Cuban cigars, or anything you eat, it's from person to person. But you can somewhat quantify it with construction. A lot of times, Cuban cigars have construction issues. They have sometimes quality control issues, meaning going into construction. Um, I can go into other. I don't want to go into other parts because I'll start bleeding into other parts. But again, Cuban cigar snobbery is a con. People just believe they're so special because they're smoking a Cuban cigar. Not necessary. No, you're not that special. No.